I remember hearing you talk with Joy and I about that last year, and I was like, "This is an incredible story," because you hear the stories, and you're one of many people that went through that, Dave. I mean, I can't tell you. I think I was talking to my insurance guy, and he was one of the first people I met down in Joplin. He was telling me his story about how he almost was in the path of it. I've heard yours. I've heard Jeremiah Cook, who used to be
Right.
a weatherman down there. So it
Yeah,
worked
he
out
was on the
perfect.
air. He was actually broadcasting when the tornado was hitting Joplin.
Yeah, we talked about that the other night. He gave me a phone call, and so I talked to him about that. And it's incredible to see like just how many different stories, even people who didn't live in Joplin but were in Joplin at the time, just have incredible stories, and some that some people will never really experience. And it's an experience you don't want to have, but it's still one that no one wants to have, obviously. But it's still one that's just you've got a story, and it's incredible to hear, and it's one of those that you hear it, and while you're listening to it, I mean, this is the second time I've heard your story, and in my mind I'm just picturing all the stuff you're talking about, and I was like, I don't know how you could have done this, or how anyone could have gone through this. And I couldn't even imagine the emotions going through not just your head but everyone that was
Mhm.
impacted by it. So
Right. It's funny because it's one of those things that you think this should have been, and it was, but this should have been a life changing event. I mean, this is a once, like you said, a once in a lifetime, hopefully a once in a lifetime event. But then you also realize that life goes on too. And then we start the process of cleaning up, and we start the process of rebuilding. And I remember specifically a couple of days after the tornado, um, I needed to mow the lawn. And why? Because the grass needed to be mowed, because it was growing and it needed to be mowed. So I went out and I got my lawnmower, and we have a small yard, so I was out with my push mower. And we live in a residential area, but it's a fairly busy street, and cars were coming by, and and the thought was going through my head, these people that are driving by and seeing me out here mowing the grass, what to look at me, they wouldn't look at me twice. It's just a guy out in his yard mowing his lawn like everybody else does. And they had no idea what a huge, tremendous thing that that I had just been through, and not just me, but so many thousands of other people in our area. And they would have never known. It's just a guy out mowing the grass because the grass needs to be mowed. And the garbage still needs to be taken out, and you still need to eat, and you still need to take a shower, and you still, I mean, all the stuff, normal stuff that you have to do. And it just, the sun comes up and the sun goes back down, and life goes on. But what it taught me was, you never know what somebody has been through. I mean, I wanted to wave at these people that went by and say, "Hey, I know I look like I'm just a guy out here mowing the grass, but I just went through the Joplin tornado. I lost friends. I almost died myself. You know, I just want you to know what happened to me." But of course, you can't do that. And what it taught me was, when you go through your everyday life and you see people out doing normal everyday things that you just wouldn't think twice to look at them twice, you never know. You don't know what they've been through. You don't know what they've been through maybe years ago, or maybe just recently within the last day or a couple of days. So it changes your perspective on how you look at people, and especially how you treat people if you have any kind of interaction with them, because you never know. You really don't know what it is. And they may look perfectly normal and doing normal activities on the outside, but inside, you just don't have any idea what's going on inside of them. So that's been something that I've taken with me in the 10 years since the tornado is, you know, give people grace, because you just don't know what their story is.
and yeah, I know after hearing all the stories, I just piecing everything together, and it's got to be one of those events that to me would just seem like it would have to change your perspective in some way, shape, or form, whether for the positive or for the negative. I mean, it's gonna change you in some aspect. And it's interesting that you say, life goes on, things continue as normal, but you never, and like you said, you never know who has been through what, and you were just through a
Right.
traumatic event, and the world just kind of kept turning, and
Yeah.
a big traumatic event, big tremendous event. When it comes to 10 years though, it's been 10 years. Anything from not so much that day onward, but within the last 9 or 8 years since then, have you seen for yourself that's changed about the town? Actually, since the day of the tornado, since now 10 years later, what's really changed about Joplin? Because when I got there, I mean, you met me in 2017 or 2018 when you got back at KSN KODE, our sister station. You know, I was still a relatively new guy, and I was there way after the tornado. I mean, where the tornado went through, where you were just talking about, there's a park there now, and it's I didn't get that side of Joplin. I got the other side of Joplin. So kind of talk about just from that day all the way up until now, what's been to you the biggest change for that community?
Well, I think that there's certainly a little, and I don't say this, I'm not a clinical person, I'm not an expert, but when I use the term PTSD, I think that there's a little bit of a collective PTSD in our town because, every spring in this part of the country, we have tornado warnings every spring. I don't think there's a year that goes by that we don't have to go to the basement and take shelter, at least for a few minutes, at least one time, and maybe more. And we're getting into that season right now, obviously, with the 10-year anniversary coming up. May is typically the most tornado prone, I guess we would say, in our area. And I think that before the Joplin tornado hit, and there had been other tornadoes in other areas around us, other towns that were very close to us. But the Joplin tornado was so big and so devastating, and we lost so many people, 160 plus people, that I think, beforehand, it was like, oh, gee, another tornado warning. Well, big deal. And you just go along with your life. And since and that's one of the reasons we didn't run and take shelter when we heard the tornado sirens at the theater that day, because, well, it's just another tornado warning. We get them all the time. But after the tornado, I mean, every single school in the area has a safe room now, every one of them. And they immediately started, the Joplin schools that had to rebuild, they all have a safe area. The schools in my town, just next to Joplin in Webb City, every school has a safe room. The safe rooms that the commercial safe rooms that the companies sell, everybody was buying those if you didn't have a basement or something. And people really panic now. There's a lot of people that panic when we hear those storm sirens, or even when the sky looks ominous. There's a lot of people that are really shaken up by that. And to be honest with you, I am too. Storms never bothered me before the tornado. And now when we get those severe warnings and those severe watches, I can feel my blood pressure going up. And when I walk into a building, and I mean any building that I walk into that I haven't been in before, whether it's in the school for my kids' productions or any other kind of building, even without thinking about it, the first thing I do is I start scanning the room, looking for an exit. If we need to get out of here quick, where do we go? Where do I grab my family, and where do we head, or where do we take shelter? That's happened in every building I've walked into for the last 10 years. And I think a lot of people are like that too. I cannot stand the sound of wind when the wind starts blowing, even if we don't have a bad storm going on. But if we've got wind blowing, the wind bothers me. And it never did that before. Storms never bothered me before, but they do now. And not so much for my own safety, but for the safety of my family. And I'm just so thankful that they weren't with me on that day, that they were perfectly safe. But had they been there, who knows what might have happened. And so that's a big thing that has changed me personally. And I think that it's probably changed a lot of people in this area. And people, you can see the posts on Facebook. Somebody will post, well, there's a storm, the station will post, hey, severe weather moving into the area. And everybody wants to know, is it going to hit Joplin? Is it going to hit Webb City? Is it going to hit, and what time is, and you probably, as a meteorologist, you probably get those questions all the time from people. Adam, when's it, when are you is it going to hit Carl Junction? Is it going to hit, and what time? And people just are really concerned about that. Not everybody, but a lot of people that went through it are. So I think that it's changed people sort of collectively. We're just a little bit more, or maybe a lot more concerned about the storms now than we were before. And like I said, the town has been, and like you were saying, that by the time you got here, the town had been pretty much rebuilt. There's still places where you can go, where you can see empty spaces. One of the things that I noticed is that there aren't nearly as many trees as there were before, and you can see a lot further distances across town than you ever could before. And that took a long time to get used to. Like, oh, I can see 3 blocks away now, which I never could before because the trees would obscure the vision. So there's still a lot of places where they don't have very many trees, and you can see where there used to be there was a parking lot there, and there used to be a building, but now it's just a parking lot. Especially on the west side of town, you see a little bit more of that. Now over on the east side, on our main street, our main business street called Rangeline Road, you'd never know there was ever a tornado there. But over on the west side of town, you still see it, and there's still reminders of it every single day when you drive through there. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not, but it definitely has changed. It's changed our city.
I would say one thing too, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the tornado. When I got down there, I noticed a lot of people were friendlier than where I'm from. Granted, I'm from North, a little bit closer to Chicago, so it's a little bit different of an atmosphere. But I just would walk down the street, people would say hello, and I was like, the only time I've ever experienced this was in Central Illinois or Southern Illinois when I was visiting my grandparents out in the country. And so it's like, you're doing this in town. It's like, this is interesting. And I think even someone told me that after that tornado happened, a lot of people were a lot kinder to each other after everything that they went through, and people were just a little bit more open to saying hi to new folks and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, would you agree with that? Yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a friendly town anyway. I think, we're just in a part of the country where people are, good old fashioned friendly folk, I think. But yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons for that also is because there was such an incredible outpouring from all over the country of people. I mean, people flocked to Joplin after that tornado, and people didn't even know what they were coming here to do. They just said, I'm going to get in a car and I'm going to drive. I live in California, but I'm driving to Joplin to see what I can do to help. And you would drive up and down the streets, and there would be people that just had small little 1 or 2 or 2-man tents set up, where they just found a patch of grass. They didn't have anywhere to stay. They didn't stay in hotels or anything like that. They just set up a tent out on a piece of grass somewhere. And every day they'd get up and they would go find something to do to help clean up, to help with whatever they could. People sent in food and bottles of water, and so many cases of water came into this town, or food, that I specifically remember sitting at a red light and people walking up to my car with a case of water saying, hey, do you need some water? And they would just give you a case of water, or they would have food of some sort and they would just give it to you, ask you to take it. I remember going back to the theater several days after the tornado and digging through the rubble, trying to salvage anything that we might be able to. And one of the pizza places pulled up with a whole carload of pizzas. And they said, hey, were you in the tornado? And we said, yeah. And they said, here, we just want to bring you some food. I remember that same day standing there in the rubble, and these 2 women pulled up, and they were nurses from, I can't remember where. They might have been from Kansas City. They might have been from somewhere else. It might have even been further away. It may have been in another state. It was a distance though. And they just got out of their car. They found the first people they could find that were doing some work, and they got out and they said, how can we help you? And I remember the lady came up, and one of those nurses came up and I I was looking at standing there looking at the area where one of our cast members had been. And I told you earlier that I had covered her body up with a sheet, and I was standing there and I was just looking at that area where her body was laying, had been laying. And one of the nurses came up and she asked me what I was looking at, and I told her this is where Sally had been. This is where her body was. We lost one of our cast members here. And I remember her just putting her arms around me and holding me, and this total stranger. You know, I have no idea who this woman was, and she had no idea who I was. But people were so kind. And I remember there was a building um, that a lot of people who were volunteers who came in to help, they all signed. It was like a house or a cabin or something that had gone through the tornado, and and people, all these volunteers had signed it. And I remember one inscription on it that said something to the effect of, you know, every single cleanup, every single swing of the hammer, everything that we've tried to do to help uh, has been worth it, because you're worth it. And I mean, people were just so kind, you know, so kind. And yeah, I think it's made us just a little bit kinder. And the other thing that happens is, as soon as there's a natural disaster somewhere in this country, or even outside of this country, people from this area, you hear about them. Well, we're going to go help. There's a hurricane that hit somewhere on the East Coast or on the Gulf Coast. You know, people from here load up and they go to help, because that's what we do, and because that's what was done for us. So there's been a lot of positives that have come out of, you know, the horrible tragedy.
Yeah, and as someone who has interviewed some of those people who have loaded up the trucks and have been in the Joplin tornado, and they've just repaid it forward.
Yeah.
I remember doing a couple of stories with people like that, and it's impressive to see something like that.